much, Larry. I'm standing up, so my voice projects a little differently. So I'm very grateful to Larry for sharing his story. And now we're going to move on to Ben and my story, which is just a little bit different. This is a co-written narrative. It's a narrative that we put together because we lived it together. Typically when we're telling stories, we wouldn't have written them down word for word. But part of this story is that it was in writing it down word for word that we were able to make sense of our experience. In 2011, I guess, oh God, was it 2011?
Yes.
Oh, in 2011, I was in my second semester of graduate school, and I got pregnant the second month into the semester. It was something we planned, and it was a whole experience for us. Shortly thereafter, I miscarried the baby. And it was at a time in our lives where we didn't want to tell people we were trying to have kids because we didn't want to have people tell us how wrong we were to start having kids in grad school, for one thing. And we also just weren't ready to share that with other people yet. And because we hadn't shared with them we were trying, we didn't feel like we could share with anybody that we had miscarried. And it was a long process for us to try and heal from that. Thankfully for us, we miscarried at a time in the semester when everybody was really busy, so nobody really noticed that I withdrew and that I wasn't my normal perky self. And so I was able to work through it with the help of some of my colleagues, my mentors, the few people that we did, in fact, tell. And we now have 3 lovely children. We are always looking for babysitters too, so if you're ever interested, you like 3 little children at the age of 3, they're adorable. So for us, the idea of telling stories in this personal narrative was a way for us to actually open up about something that was shrouded with silence and secrecy. Because miscarriage in the United States, we don't talk about it. I had no idea miscarriage is as prevalent as it is. I knew it was something to be afraid of, and I knew that's why you don't tell people that you're pregnant until at least 13 weeks into the pregnancy, because that's when a lot of the danger is gone down. But I didn't know how prevalent it was, and once it happened to me, I didn't have a place for an outlet. And Ben can talk even more here. I'll invite Ben to talk about what he was experiencing in terms of not having an outlet.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no outlet to talk about it for the mothers, there's certainly no outlet to talk about it for the fathers, because so much of that, and we're going to delve into the story, but there's no, what I experience and what I've spoken with many fathers is that the pregnancy happens through the lens of the mother. So anything discussion that has happened always focuses on the mother, and fathers don't have a really outlet to talk about things. And so when something like this happens, all that silence, that lack of discussion is amplified even more so, for me at least. That was my experience. So would you like to?
Yeah, I was one last thing I was going to say is, so in the process of writing this, we were invited to be a part of a collection of narratives about pregnancy loss, miscarriage, infertility, stillbirth, that type of thing. And I wrote my version of the story, and then Ben wrote his as it fit with mine, because it seemed to fit with our experiences. I was the one that had carried the child. I was the one that had the very visceral experience of this miscarriage, and then he kind of experienced it through me. So that made sense for us in the way that we were creating our narrative or writing our narrative. And like I said, typically we wouldn't have a script that was written out quite so exactly as this one is. But in this case, it was the process of writing for this book chapter that I got to find out what Ben was thinking. And you'll hear that he did not want to share or the reasons why he didn't want to share with me at the time we were experiencing this. But in the course of the year and talking with a few people about it and figuring out what I felt and writing my narrative and Ben writing his narrative and figuring out how we could experience this together, we found that this personal narrative was an incredible way to cope with a situation that was both shrouded with secrecy and very viscerally emotive for us. So this is our story. We call it Unscripted Loss, a hesitant narrative of a reconstructed family. The first time I tested positive for his pregnancy was during my second year of graduate school. Ben and I had only been trying for 4 months, so we were really surprised by our success. We were not that kind of couple that gets pregnant on the first try. Our conversation about starting our family began with me suggesting that we should start trying to get pregnant, and Ben responding,
"Yeah, we're ready for that. What did you have for breakfast? Root beer and a popsicle?"
He had a point.
I remember when Julie first proposed trying to get pregnant. The two of us were lying in bed talking about life when she said,
"I want to have a baby."
I assume she meant we start planning for having a baby. In an attempt to be pragmatic, I started rattling off concerns so we could tackle them head on. Julie grew quiet. What's wrong?
There's never a perfect time to have a baby without obstacles, but I don't want the obstacles to dictate our family. I want love to be how we decide when we have kids.
Essentially, she was acting with her heart, and I was acting with my brain. We needed both.
We realized we had no idea what getting pregnant would really require, so Ben consulted one of our instructors, Leah, who had already been mentoring us. To get started, Leah suggested we pull the goalie, which meant pulling down our defenses. I went off birth control.
If we were going to do this, we would need to be able to manage it financially. Turns out having a baby is really expensive. Luckily, our modest insurance covered most of the potential costs of pregnancy and delivery. Focusing on this type of task made it easier for me to see this baby thing actually happening. What else should men do to prepare?
Whenever I plan to do activities that are bad for a pregnant woman, like drinking, not something we do at all grad school, I would go pee on a stick. One night, I was in the bathroom, and I tested positively pregnant. I stood there frozen, and then I walked out of the bathroom to where Ben was sitting in the dining room, and he must have seen the strange emotion on my face, which was something like confusion and
What's wrong?
shock. I think I'm pregnant.
Bullshit.
Not exactly what I expected his response to be, but I guess I should have anticipated his disbelief given the number of times I joked about being pregnant since we were together.
Of course, I turned out to be the asshole doubting Thomas. My skepticism quickly turned into joy. This is how it was supposed to feel. Excitement, surprise, and yes, a little bit of panic.
I was carrying a tiny little person in my belly. Ooh. A flood of emotions.
The next day, we shared our exciting secret with Leah. The big question in our minds was, now what? Julie and I breathed a sigh of relief as Leah suggested steps to take in the coming weeks. We asked her not to share the news until after the first trimester, just to make sure the baby was healthy. She agreed. Our decision was wise.
Leah told me miscarriage is common, especially for first pregnancies. There are so many facets of pregnancy and delivery that aren't talked about during most child-rearing and conception discussions. So I just tried to put the conversation out of my mind. I didn't want to have concerns. After all, my only choice was really to follow whatever clues my body and my baby were giving me.
Yes, we had concerns about losing the baby, but I wasn't worried about it.
I began incorporating preparatory activities into my life. I bought a necklace to wear during the pregnancy that I would eventually give to the child. I checked out books on the current state of pregnancy from the library. I stopped eating my graduate student diet of hot dogs and discount pasta dishes.
Preparing for our baby felt like a job for Julie, and not me. She would be the one going through the intense physical changes while I was just there to offer support. I was excited to be a daddy. Pregnancy was wonderful, but it wasn't happening to me. Keeping it a secret wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, though. Julie and I shared a secret and the process of hiding it strengthened our commitment and love to each other and our growing family. It became that much more precious, something to protect, something worth waiting to share. After about 3 weeks, after we found out we were pregnant, we flew to New Orleans for a conference. It meant being far away from the safety of our home. Julie was only 6 weeks into the pregnancy, but this was our first big test.
We arrived safely and I made it through the first day of the conference. I stifled a smile as one of my professors, Dan, advised me to wait until after I finished my doctoral work to have children. Thought to myself, well, I guess that ship has sailed.
As much as these conferences were about scholarly work, they were also about socializing. Julie had to avoid alcohol without appearing out of the ordinary. I'm a well-known lightweight, so my friends and colleagues embraced the idea of then letting go. Just a little bit. It worked out as a distraction. No one caught on, and I got to be Julie's hero. It was nice to be able to contribute to the pregnancy.
I awoke the third morning of the conference at 6 a.m. needing to pee, not completely happy to be awake at 6 a.m. needing to pee. As I completed my bathroom visit, I reached for the toilet paper. I looked down after I wiped, and there was a bright red splotch of blood on the toilet paper. Time stopped moving. I remember staring with dazed disbelief at my positive pregnancy test, but at this toilet paper, I stared with paralyzing emptiness. I'd read that in the 6th week, many women experience a dark-colored discharge. Bright red was not a good sign. I put on a panty liner and I walked back to bed and laid down next to Ben. And there's nearly no point in waking him up. He was going to know soon enough.
All I could think about was how much losing the baby must be killing her. We wanted to stop what we were doing and grieve, but we were still at the conference. The private and public worlds that we had carefully separated up to this point were now directly overlapping.
I told Leah what was happening, and she re-emphasized what she told me during our first conversation about miscarriage. It wasn't my fault.
After we got home, Julie went to the doctor's office to check her hormone levels. If the hormone levels were low, we know something was wrong. A number over 2,000 meant good news.
My level was 55. That number has a new significance in my life. When the nurse told me, she said, you're going to want to come in weekly to get your hormone levels tested, just to make sure your pregnancy terminates properly. And that was the first time anybody actually verbalized that my pregnancy was officially over. The full repercussions of the blood test hit me, and I could hardly breathe. My body racked with heaving but silent sobs, bent in two. I shook with sorrow. My pregnancy was officially over.
I knew the news was coming, but I felt like a car had hit me. No. I felt like a car had hit Julie.
Leah texted me something sympathetic. Condolences meant the whole pregnancy wasn't just in my imagination, and I cried until I ran out of tears.
When I got home, Julie was there, and I just held her as she cried.
He stroked my hair. He whispered that he loved me, and together we mourned the loss of our child.
Julie needed me to be strong and take care of her. I didn't know what to feel. I was sad, but not like the deep despair Julie was experiencing. Without ever being a part of the physical pregnancy and miscarriage, the death seemed distant, while Julie's pain was in the forefront. I had experienced the entire pregnancy through the filter of Julie, which somehow dulled the pain of the miscarriage, as it had dulled the earlier excitement. Now, with the sense of loss, I had no idea how to react. I had no one to talk to about the miscarriage.
How long was I supposed to cry? How should I be feeling? Who should I be telling? I mean, I had no idea what I should be doing. The next day, we headed to Indiana to be with Ben's family for Thanksgiving, and we decided it was best not to tell anyone. Even if I wanted to talk about it, I didn't know where to start. Thanksgiving Day, about a week after my initial bleeding began, was the most physically challenging day. It was the day that I shed the majority of my uterine lining, and I experienced the worst cramps I've ever had in my entire life. It was sickening to be able to feel the pregnancy flowing out of me, dripping out of me throughout the day. At one point, I felt a huge surge of blood, so I went to check my pad, and into the toilet fell a long, thin strip of tissue. And I cleaned myself up, and I looked at the toilet, and in that toilet were the last remnants of my child. What kind of a mom flushes her child down a toilet? Eventually, I depressed the handle and I watched blankly as the water refilled the bowl, leaving no trace of what I had just experienced.
In the end, what made the experience most difficult for me was not being able to talk about it, because turning to anyone for emotional support just felt weak, like an unwarranted cry for attention. No one knew we even had a baby to start with, so we had no idea how to go about telling people we had lost it. Uncertainty led to feelings of isolation.
The thing I wasn't prepared for was how long it takes to miscarry a child. I always envisioned miscarriage to be quick. You know, you bleed for a second, swiftly and endlessly, you end your pregnancy. It took me 2 weeks to miscarry my first pregnancy. For 2 weeks, I felt my pregnancy drip from between my thighs. It took 2 weeks for the connection to my first child to dissipate.
To this day, I sometimes feel like I have nothing to say. At the time, it was like I was a teenager again, overcome with emotions that no words could describe. And now I look back and think, maybe I was a secondary character in the story of mother and child.
My child's life began with its conception, and its life ended when I miscarried it. I've tried trouble not blaming myself. Maybe if I created a better environment, my child could have lived. Sometimes I feel like it didn't really happen, like it's just a memory or a bad dream. But artifacts like this necklace, they remind me tangibly that it did happen. I did have a child, and my child did not survive. What do I do with my necklace now?
There is no baby, no memorial, no family remembrance. But it did happen. We did have a baby. When we try again, the specter of our first pregnancy will hang over us. Getting excited will be that much more difficult, now knowing that can all end suddenly. Even though we did nothing wrong the first time, our next time will be filled with cautious optimism. Next time, I want to be sure we do everything we can to protect our child and ourselves. Next time, I want to see our baby.